Welcome to Unlayered, the show where we explore next-gen blockchains. I'm your host, Sal, alongside my co-host, Dave. And today we are joined by Hardhat Chat. Hardhat Chat is a pseudo-anonymous creator of the Ore project. This project got a lot of attention, especially in March, April, when Solana was hitting a lot of congestion issues. Many were pointing the finger at Ore. And for those who are not familiar, Ore is a fair launch proof-of-work cross-border digital currency anyone can mine. And so there's a lot of interesting things we can discuss with respect to this project. One of the most unique ones I've seen on Solana, and really excited to get into it. How's it going, Mr. Chad?
Good, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Amazing. Well, I think one of the key points behind Ore is the similarities to Bitcoin, the homage to proof of work, which I always loved proof of work over proof of stake for a lot of reasons. It doesn't create these huge winners that just acquire a lot of stake without actually having anything to do with securing the network. You often find that exchanges just end up being the biggest validators, for instance, on POS networks. Whereas proof of work, it's a physics problem. You have to invest in infrastructure. You have to keep up with the latest trends in mining. Why did you feel like you wanted to bring that over to a quote unquote modern blockchain like Solana?
Yeah, there's a few pieces to it. I guess at some level, going back to maybe like the block size wars on Bitcoin, you had two opposing sides. Like on one side, you had the big blockers, which was most of the network, frankly. A lot of the miners, Coinbase, a lot of the entrepreneurs on Bitcoin at the time, made these arguments that they wanted to increase the block size on Bitcoin in order to scale the network and support lower fees and more transactions. And then on the other side of the argument, you had the small blockers, who were primarily the Bitcoin core developers and some related parties. And their argument was that the natural state of Bitcoin is for super expensive fees for the block space to be saturated, and for most Bitcoin to not move and kind of take on this, I don't know, like gold-esque sort of static asset characteristic. And then the other part of that argument was that it also helps to centralize the network, because if the block sizes get too big, then regular people can't run nodes, and the network kind of gets pushed into data centers like AWS and becomes more centralized that way. And I think ultimately, like, my opinion is both sides, have their merits. Like the big blockers are right in that these chains need to scale. like they need to support a lot of transactions and at very low fees that people are going to use them. Otherwise, they're just not competitive to like banking rails or wires or ACH. And that's right. I find Solana is like particularly attractive. It is competitive to like banking rails at a very fundamental sense. Like it runs 24/7. You can send any amount, like any dollar transaction, settles in a second and costs a fraction of a cent. And that's really competitive. And at the same time, is like the merits to the small blocker arguments, in my opinion, is that like people do want to feel some sort of tangible connection to these networks. Like people want to run nodes, and this proof of work on proof of stake concept kind of gets you the best of both worlds. And that's you can have the underlying consensus layer run on a proof of stake algorithm, and it runs on these very overpowered nodes and sort of edge data centers and is very fast. But you can build a currency on top of that with proof of work, and it supports an algorithm where people can run mining nodes out of their homes if they so want to. And that way people, feel the tangible connection to the network. You kind of get this like democratized token issuance that anyone can participate in. But at the end of the day, it's also a highly scalable payments chain.
I see. So this project is fair launch, no insider allocation, no pre-mine, a lot of, again, analogs to Bitcoin. Is your
Yep.
vision for ore to be kind of like because Bitcoin's like digital gold? Like, how do you see people using ore? Is it more of, to your point, like an actual payments currency that leverages Solana for the speed, or how will people use this?
Yeah. Part of the intent was to try to return a little bit to the original Bitcoin vision of this like peer-to-peer electronic cash. I think that was what attracted like, a lot of optimism and inspiration in the early days of Bitcoin. And I think more recently, since the small blockers kind of won the block size wars and Bitcoin has taken on this gold narrative, um, like adoption on Bitcoin is actually lower than it was in like 2018. Just in terms of like businesses that accept payment in Bitcoin. Um, and I think that's kind of unfortunate. It's like if you compare a Bitcoin adoption chart to like a YouTube or a Netflix or a Facebook or like any other kind of tech product, Bitcoin adoption is actually pretty bad, frankly. Like it's
Yeah.
like all metrics are bad other than price. It's like
Right.
the main the main thing. And but price is important. So like, kind of you can't ignore it completely. Um, but I mean, I do think we've kind of lost sight of this, like, larger vision of just getting people to use the chain and, use the tokens and sort of as this alternative sort of form of money. Um, and so, yeah, I sort of wanted to like try to get crypto back on that track, basically, of like, offering the world a peer-to-peer digital cash that we could use for payments.
I think it's an amazing experiment, and I love what you're saying about you're removing consensus from a POW coin, which I think is the first time that's ever happened. And I think that's a really interesting insight. I think probably the counter is when you have POW Bitcoin and obviously Ethereum when it was POW, there was an intrinsic value to those assets outside of the fact it's just being created as a POW coin and to some people that has an intrinsic value, but it was also being used for transactions on the network, and it just became the canonical asset on those networks. And obviously, OR doesn't benefit from those things. So yeah, it's interesting. And why do you think something like a Sol or an ETH couldn't become that decentralized, more scalable medium of exchange?
Yeah, I mean, proof of work is interesting for a few different reasons. Um, yeah, I mean, going to Bitcoin, proof of work on Bitcoin, it supports two different responsibilities. You first have proof of work provides consensus for the chain, and then the second thing it supports is token distribution. And when we kind of set out with this idea of like, oh, we could rewrite Bitcoin as a smart contract and launch that on Solana, as we were writing it, we realized that, well, actually Solana is providing consensus, and so we don't need to worry about that. And that actually opens up a lot of like flexibility in terms of what we're able to do, focusing only on the token distribution side of things. And yeah, I think proof of work is really interesting, just purely on a token distribution standpoint, even without like any sort of consensus or security properties, or it's like we don't actually need to add those. So like mining and proof of work still makes sense, even if it's only for token distribution. Like people still understand it. You can press a button on a computer, you can do some computation. Your computer gets hot, your fan spins, and you earn a token doing that. Like that kind of basic interaction, I think everyone kind of intuitively understands. And I guess where I see that playing a role is crypto at some level is sort of a alternative to like central banking, really, where we have this money supply, and it's like how is the money going to be issued? And in a fiat currency, it's basically a board of bankers that decide when we're going to mint new money and how much we're going to mint. And one of the things that I think was so revolutionary about Bitcoin is basically, saying, well, we can replace all of that with some open source code that anyone can read, and we can audit it, and everyone understands how it works, and it's going to function by these known rules, and anyone can participate. And yeah, so I think we sort of have a chance to re-implement that basic vision, like proof of work for token distribution, where like everyone can participate. It can work on any laptop or phone, and you get to much more fair kind of like, I don't know, currency distribution than say the systems that work by like a central bank, or even Bitcoin mining in that case, which is like highly inaccessible to most people. So
yeah, and something like Sol presumably as well, where you haven't got that fair. It's not as fair a distribution, and as we say with proof of stake, it tends to be that the whales just keep on getting sort of richer and richer.
yeah, that. And the other thing that proof of work is kind of interesting, that makes it interesting, is it ties token production to the physical world through like energy, and that every new token that gets put into circulation has a real physical energy cost to it, and that kind of creates a real economic opportunity cost to producing tokens, because that energy could be used for anything really. Energy is like the most universal fundamental resource that we know of. Existence, everything requires energy. So like for there to be a real tangible like economic opportunity cost to producing new tokens, it doesn't set a floor price per se, but it signals how much people are willing to give up to acquire one of those tokens, which makes it kind of interesting, like just from a cost of production analysis standpoint.
So I think it's a very powerful vision, and it's a simple one where if you want to onboard hundreds of millions or billions of people, give them an easy path to acquire coins, to acquire tokens,
Yeah.
whether through mining or what have you. I think this experiment actually also played out pretty well with Telegram and Ton, where you had these essentially click farming type of apps, or things like Hamster Combat, Catizen, Notcoin. Pretty simple. It got people on board. These things now do millions of DAUs. I think at some point it flipped Ethereum and daily active addresses. Ton did. But help me understand this. I think one of the interesting things about Bitcoin's story was, if you were early enough, yeah, you could get away with mining it on a personal computer. Maybe you were able to, co-opt your school's computer lab into rigging a bunch of miners and acquiring some Bitcoin that way. Over time, though, the game got a lot harder. A lot more competition came in. Everyone's, optimizing their rigs and essentially crowding out the little person. How did you architect or to prevent this, or do you think this will still happen as more people get on board?
Yeah, this is the really hard technical problem that we're taking on, because it's not easy. Like, it's easy to sit on here and say, okay, we created a token that everyone can mine. Doing that at a technical level is like like a very challenging problem, actually. And we have a thesis. Like, we'll see how it plays out. It's hard to make predictions about the future, but basically, a lot of this comes down to the hash function that is used. And in the V1, we used a hash function called SHA-3, which is kind of a successor to SHA-256, which is what is used in Bitcoin mining. This hash function is very easy to optimize in hardware. So a GPU will get like, I don't know, 3 orders of magnitude more performant per watt than a CPU at doing SHA-256 and SHA-3 hashing. And then a ASIC or like FPGA board can basically do another couple orders of magnitude on top of that. And so with our supply function of we're trying to issue one ore per minute, the orders of magnitude difference between your like top end compute and your low end compute are so large that we actually just like, eventually run out of decimals to give everyone a reward. And that was kind of the fundamental problem of the V1. That's where I kind of, after recognizing that, realized like, okay, we need to pause this and like focus on V2 and fix it in V2. There were other issues as well, but like the hash function was the fundamental one that kind of required an upgrade. And so for the V2, we have a different hash function. We spent a long time kind of researching how to actually solve this problem. And what we settled on was we found a hash function called Equix, which was originally designed for the Tor onion browser network, and recently rolled out, I think over the last like 2 years or so. And it's basically the client puzzle that Tor uses to like disincentivize spam on the network, which is where proof of work actually comes from. Is more of a spam prevention mechanism than like a crypto thing. But we like stole it from the and started using it for other purposes in crypto to do mining. And the history behind this hash function basically is it was written by a developer named Tevador, who originally wrote RandomX for Monero. And RandomX was the ASIC resistant hash function for Monero chain. And Tor hired him to build this client puzzle. And he kind of took some sub processes from RandomX and combined them with another hash function called Equihash, which is used in Zcash as well, and is the ASIC resistant hash function in Zcash. And they kind of combine these two things and then call the new hash function Equix. And there are currently no ASICs today that I'm aware of, purpose built to solve Equix puzzles. But as a point of reference, there are some ASICs today on the market for the Zcash variant of Equihash, and they basically are 2 orders of magnitude, like 100 times more performant per watt than a CPU, which is actually really good in terms of ASIC resistance, as far as ASIC resistance goes. Like, because like 100 order of magnitude difference per watt is actually not that crazy. And in the V2, we're adding 11 decimals to the token. So our thesis is that even if one day ASICs do come into the picture for this, like, Equix hash that we're using, there'll be somewhere between like 10 and 100x more performant per watt than a CPU. But because we have 11 decimals on the token, we should still have space to make sure that everyone earns some reward at the end of the day, with like many orders of magnitude buffer to spare, is kind of the thesis. But like, things change, so we'll see how this plays out really over the next probably 5 to 10 years. But that's kind of our bet going forward, that we're trying to build around.
So to summarize real quickly, is the optimization problem you're making here is you want the spread between, like, I guess the lowest tier miner and the highest tier miner to be, it's going to be inevitable that there will be a gap, but you want it to be as kind of small as possible, like 100x or so versus 1,000,000x, so that everyone can kind of still get something out of each block reward. Okay, that's a good way to put it.
Should we go back actually to your V1 launch? It'd be good just to understand how that went, because from my perspective as an outsider, obviously Solana itself sort of ground to a halt, and there seemed to be a massive issue with spamming. So what was the approach that you were taking in V1, and what was the issues that led to you halting?
Yeah, the V1, the main insight there was, we realized we actually didn't need to worry about consensus, because Solana was providing that, since that gave us, a lot more flexibility to do more creative things that other proof of work tokens hadn't done before. And the main thing we were experimenting with there was we gave each miner their own hash chain. And so the thought was, as long as you find a hash of sufficient difficulty, you can append that to your chain, and you can land hashes and I can land hashes. And as long as our hashes are valid, we can both earn rewards. And that's how we get to this point where everyone can mine, is our rewards are non-exclusive. We can both earn at the same time. So that was the intent going in. And we realized, like, okay, we're giving everyone kind of a bot, to submit transactions. And as long as the difficulty is low enough, people should find hashes relatively quickly, and then it's just about getting them to the chain. And so we had like some inkling of an idea that's like maybe it would be, a lot of traffic, but I didn't know exactly where in the stack it was going to cause issues. It just turned out there was like some bugs in the networking layer that it really aggravated and made a lot worse. Because the way it ended up playing out was there really were like 2 tiers of miners in the V1. Just to like put it bluntly, there was one tier that was most people, which were using the open source clients that we had written and put out. And the experience there was like people would mine for a little bit, maybe 10, 20 seconds. So they would find a hash of sufficient difficulty. They would submit that and the transaction would fail. And then they would try to submit again and the transaction would fail. And they would try to submit again and the transaction would fail. And those people were landing a hash maybe once every, 10 to 15 minutes or so. And then you had a second tier of miners who basically were just more technically sophisticated. And they realized that like the difficulty was so low that it was very easy to cycle with, say, even a regular laptop. You could mine in parallel across a bunch of key pairs. And the game there becomes much more about how many hashes could you fit in a single transaction, and then how many transactions could you fit in a Jito bundle, and how high could you tip your bundles? and those people were landing probably like dozens of hashes every few seconds or so. And so we had this very lopsided kind of outcome there, because of the congestion on the chain and just due to like, differences in technical sophistication. The game was not about hash power at all, really. It was just about like, could you land transactions? So that was another kind of, reason for leading to the pause. In addition to like the hash function problems, is like, okay, we also have this like weird kind of lopsided mining situation that we want to resolve. So that was kind of like the issue with V1. It was great marketing because like obviously we paused the chain and like it forced everyone to talk about ore, but like was not really the intent of the project. Like we wanted everyone to earn the token, and that wasn't really happening. And so it's kind of, in terms of our overall mission, I think we had room for improvement. But to get to the V2, what we're changing, or we're changing some of the incentives such that the way that miners will maximize rewards is by landing the most difficult hash they can every minute. So basically, regardless of hash power, or regardless of how much hash power you have, miners should maximize the rewards by basically mining for 56 seconds, and then submitting the most difficult hash they've found in that time to the chain for verification. And then based on the number of like leading zeros on that hash, the difficulty, you'll earn more or less rewards. And if you try to spam more frequently than that, you'll basically only increase your fee per hash. And so it just kind of eats away into your yield. And that's how we're trying to mitigate the spam problem in the V2.
Can you just provide slightly more color on that? Because in my mind, if it's 100x difference between maybe the best performing piece of hardware and the worst performing piece of hardware, and you've tried to get that number as small as possible, surely at some point it's going to be better to just run loads and loads of small ones in the thousands and the millions. Whereas obviously if the difference between the best and the worst was like 1 million, then it would make more sense that you would try and put all of your hash power into a single machine. So how are you, I don't know, is that a valid concern? Or how are you going about trying to mitigate it?
Yeah, if you are splitting your hash power across multiple key pairs and submitting, maybe the other thing to mention here too is like we're limiting the contract limits 1 hash per transaction. So for every hash you find, you have to submit a different transaction, basically. And so if you're splitting your hash power across key pairs and you have to submit like 10 transactions instead of 1, you're paying more like base fees and more priority fees and more Jito tips and everything else just to land those 10 transactions as opposed to landing that 1. So, on like an EV expected value standpoint, the ore you might earn from those 10 is probably the same as the 1 on average, but you have a lot more fees submitting 10 transactions as opposed to submitting 1 transaction. So as much as you can, you're kind of going to be incentivized to, like consolidate your hash power around a single key pair and just land the most difficult hash you possibly can every minute.
I guess one thing I wanted to clarify actually is because you mentioned with V1, one of the issues was it became a game of spamming transactions on chain. And this is kind of it's a common problem with Solana, just dating back to 2021, where people would want to mint something, they spam it, they want to buy a meme coin that's hot, they start spamming it. Jito's become kind of the MEV king of Solana, and now that's part of the meta, right? Now you kind of have to just, if you want to land really quickly, if you're running a really tight operation on the trading front, all these pro trading apps even have a field now where you have your bribe amount, you have your priority fee. It seems like we've moved kind of somewhat far away from the original vision of Solana, which was fast, cheap for everyone. I mean, what's been kind of your response to this kind of ground shifting underneath, so to speak, of Solana? Do you think it gets solved over time, or is this an inevitability of any blockchain that wants to scale with usage?
Yeah. I think it's difficult. Like it's a difficult problem. You have a tragedy of the commons problem really on any public computer network. Particularly on a blockchain where there's like a financial benefit to like landing your transactions in a timely manner. It's very, very difficult then to I think just handle the spam that like inherently incentivizes. Perhaps I'm just thinking aloud here as we're talking. I mean, Tor is managing this right now as some proof of work mechanism. And I mean, on DevNet, like we have the similar issue on like all DevNet faucets across crypto. I think like on Solana in particular, but Ethereum, if I'm recalling correctly, have a spam issue as well, where people spam the DevNet faucets and drain them. And the way that has kind of been managed is largely through a proof of work mechanism as well, where proof of work kind of functions as a spam disincentive. And maybe that's the way that this ends up getting resolved. Maybe there's some role that like Ore could play there. I'm not sure. I'm kind of just thinking off the top of my head right now, but I think, clearly it seems there's not enough disincentive to like to spam, and so we do have a tragedy, the commons problem, where I mean, even like good actors, good faith actors, like they see a financial benefit to sending way more transactions than they need to increase the probability of inclusion. Maybe if there's some alternative method to, provide high odds of inclusion, then people won't see a need to spam. But right now, it's just kind of, there is some limited bandwidth there. And so it's like, if you can maximize your allocation of that bandwidth, you're probably going to, increase your odds of inclusion.
Did you, by the way, mention how you decided to go with Solana as the underlying ecosystem to build on top of? I'm sure you've considered other options too, right? Like a lot of people could even see this, why not just make this an L2? That's like kind of the meme of the day. But yeah, how do you think about the choice of the ecosystem?
Yeah. Personally, I'm not a fan of L2s. Is a short answer. Like we originally got to the idea of org because I spent a long time thinking about bridging Bitcoin to Solana in particular. It's like, how do we solve, like, we lost the block size wars, Bitcoin can't scale. How do we make Bitcoin scale? Okay, let's bridge it. I like dive deep into the technicals of bridging, and I frankly just like wasn't convinced that that was the solution. And so it just kind of started as a joke. Was like, well, let's just rewrite it as a smart contract and launch that, and that gets this quote unquote Bitcoin on Solana. And so it just started as like that joke, and then that sat on the shelf for like, I don't know, 7-8 months before I had finally had the time to like work on it. And honestly, I thought it was going to flop, but we're here talking about it now. So so I guess maybe there's something to the joke. But yeah, in terms of why Solana, I've been working in the Solana space for around 2.5-3 years now. And so I was just familiar with the technology. And frankly, I was a crypto skeptic for a really long time because I come from this like payments and banking world where I used to do lots of integrations with banks moving like tens of billions of dollars a year and like every currency imaginable. And like we obviously knew about Ethereum, but it was like, why would we use this kind of thing? Because like the fees were just so absurd, and it could take, I don't know, 30 minutes to 2 hours to like get a transaction to land. And so it's just like that wasn't competitive to like ACH rails. ACH and wires were, way better for our use case anyway. And so, but Solana, I first heard about it in February of 2021, and I understood the pitch at the time was, basically you could send a $10,000 transaction to anyone in the world across borders. It'll settle in a second, and the fees are like a fraction of a cent, and it runs 24/7. And that was competitive to ACH and wires rails, and that was what really kind of caught my eye and pulled me into crypto. And so Solana's just kind of been where I've been working since in that ecosystem. And so I guess when we had this thought to like, try a new proof of work token, Solana was just like the natural choice. I didn't really even consider any other chain.
Because there is a feeling that Ethereum is this institutional chain now. You've obviously got the Biddle fund from BlackRock, and everyone seems to think that everyone's just going to settle everything on Ether 1, but no one seems to have any thoughts about how it's actually going to be traded and sent around, because surely that can't happen on Ether 1. So it leads me to think that this is not its final destination. It's either going to go to an L2, probably a centralized L2, but then that gets very tricky because not all of the major players are going to want to buy in. So it all just gets very, very tricky. And there's this feeling that maybe Solana isn't going to have any of that pie, and I just don't buy it. I just think it's like by far the most obvious choice, but you sort of have to look ahead and where the puck is going.
Yeah. My hot take, honestly, which might get me into trouble for saying this, but I think most L2s today are basically just unlicensed money transmitters. Like they have all the properties of like a a Venmo, let's say. It's kind of like, they can reverse transactions, they can pause transactions anytime. It's just a database holding people's balances that is running in a centralized computer somewhere in AWS. Yeah, and they just haven't applied for the MTLs, and so it's kind of like, I think if the regulators understood that at a deeper level, like some of these LTs would be in more trouble than they are. But yeah, I think ultimately you need to decentralize, otherwise you're just an unlicensed money transmitter.
Yeah, I agree. Just going back to ore, I was wondering about the supply, because obviously one of the main selling points about Bitcoin is 21 million total max cap supply. You keep mentioning, I think on V1, that it was maybe the same rewards per hash that went through. V2, there'll be, I think, a difference between rewards depending on how big or how powerful the hash was that you submitted. Sorry if that terminology is wrong. So is this going on forever? Are you going to be doing a halvening? Are you capped at 21 million?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I can just make this announcement now. You're going to force me to send out a tweet this weekend. But yeah, we are going to cap the V2 supply. We're going to keep the same 1 ore per minute supply function. We think that it's like a very simple, kind of reliable, dependable thing. And it's easy to understand. But we are going to cap the limit at 21 million tokens. And so at a sort of steady 1 ore per minute rate, that will give us 40 years of mining until the total ore supply is mined up. And then, after that, it'll be a fixed supply token. So we're basically looking at like 2064 when all 21 million ore will be mined.
And why were you not thinking about doing a halvening and reducing the supply as we go ahead?
Yeah. My belief here is that there's already so much advantage to being early. If you start doing halvenings, you basically over prioritize those early adopters to an extent that it hurts long-term adoption. And so one of my frustrations, I guess, with Bitcoin today is that we're kind of in a situation where like over 90% of the overall Bitcoin supply has been mined, yet less than like 5% of the world population are holders. And of that supply, it's like, I think it's something like, I don't know, 70, 80% of it is held by like 1% of wallets or something. And it was partly because like over half the supply, the Bitcoin supply, was mined in those first 5 years. And like, even 5 years after launch, like, I mean, Bitcoin was is growing, but most people hadn't heard of it at that point yet. And so you're just kind of starting from this like very lopsided kind of distribution, which kind of like forces, us into the situation we're at today. We're like, our primary call to action when we onboard people to crypto is we basically tell them like, buy my coin, buy Bitcoin, buy Ethereum, buy Sol, buy this meme coin, like buy whatever. And I sort of see it as like, I see that as problematic because there's just a limit to like how many people we're going to onboard when our whole onboarding call to action is like invest in my stuff. So our thesis with Ore was kind of like, well, we have this alternative method of onboarding people to crypto called mining, which is like this, token distribution method that's been here since day one. And if we could build a consumer experience around that, like that might be the way that we just get tokens to the hands of tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people. And so I think it's important that we keep that opportunity open for as long as we reasonably can. And that's why we, want to go for that linear, like 1 ore per minute rate is like, we'll hit the 50% mark 20 years in rather than 5 years in. and we'll hit the 90% mark. I think it's like 38 years in or something like that, 37 years in, as opposed to like 11 or 13 years in that Bitcoin had. And so it's like, it just gives us a lot more time. So people joining 5 years from now or 10 years from now, like they still have upside in the token, and they can get like a reasonable percentage of the supply, and don't feel like they've already missed the boat because they were just born like 5 years too late or something.
One of the things you mentioned in the tweet thread you put out when you paused V1 was obviously what we talked about, which is revisiting the smart contracts and making some changes, and the other was building a team and kind of scaling up the operational side of OR. Can you talk a bit about what that's looked like for you so far and where you guys are at?
Yeah, we're a team of 2 now. I don't want to dox the other individual just yet. We will both dox at some point for sure. But yeah, right now, it's like Hardhat Chat and co. working on the system. And yeah, we've been going through Coliseum the Coliseum Accelerator the last like 5.5 weeks now. We're coming up on demo day. Yeah, we have started a company. So there is a registered entity, Regolith Labs, and the mission of the company is basically just to onboard 100 million people to crypto through mining. And yeah, we view OR as like the first product of a few that we plan to launch over the next few months. Yeah, OR being the kind of the base currency, the like proof of work token on Solana, fair launch. We call it a cross-border digital currency. Kind of funny. It's a CBDC.
Yeah, that's great.
But that's product 1, and then we have a few kind of secret projects in the works that we'll announce probably around like Breakpoint.
How's that been, by the way? Because we had Matt from the Coliseum on the show a little while ago. But is that experience that you gained a lot of insight from? Would you recommend it to other potential founders?
Yeah, I would definitely. It's been invaluable, just in terms of the like relationships and connections to other founders throughout the ecosystem. I think everyone in the cohort is like incredibly world-class talent, and the mentors that they brought in, everyone from Arnold at Sphere, Vibu at Drip, Mert, Stepan at Squads, and so many others, is like getting one-on-one time with them, and being able to ask them questions and just get the Telegram handle to chat anytime has been super, super valuable for everything from fundraising to like product strategy and Twitter strategies, stuff like that. It's like there's great people. And so yeah, being able to get those relationships through Coliseum and get the advice of Maddie and Clay and Nate has been super awesome. But we have been the guinea pigs. So we've like, I think the Coliseum guys have also like, we're probably, if at it, the roughest that like any Coliseum group will ever have.
How do you think about governance and things like that? Because obviously it's something which Bitcoin has struggled with. Are you in the camp of just sort of set this fee to hopefully that's the final iteration and then just leave it? Or would you want to introduce any form of governance, do you think?
Yeah, my experience with governance has also not been great. I think that was probably the third like nail in the coffin on the V1 was we just made the wrong thing governable. Like difficulty should never have been a governable property. And I think that, that was like a design mistake simply because I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what the right algorithm should have been for like changing difficulty. So we just made it an admin function to change the difficulty. And that naturally invited the debates around, well, like who has the authority to change the difficulty? Is it me unilaterally? Is it the community based on a token vote? Is it a futarchy based on like some other system? And at the end of the day, the difficulty just never should have been governable to begin with. I think that was kind of just not the right design. And so with V2, we're definitely trying to minimize the admin variables. At this point, the implementation that's out there right now does have a few admin variables. There's like some tolerance thing, and there is a pause function, but I'm actually considering just removing all of those for the V2. And I think what might be simpler is if we remove all admin functions entirely, and then we might leave the contract mutable for like a few months just to manage the initial launch, and then long-term refreeze it. And I think if we refreeze that contract, like in many ways, OR will be more immutable than even Bitcoin is. I think it's harder to change an immutable contract on Solana than it is to like ship a commit to the Bitcoin core code, depending on the commit, obviously. but like, I mean, a frozen contract on Solana is like, I mean, you're not going to change that really ever. So it's a big, like, freezing the contract is a really big long-term commitment. So we just want to make sure that we have like the overall design and mechanics right before we, prematurely do that. And so I think no admin variables, but leaving it mutable for a few months and then freezing, after we get through the launch period will kind of make sense. And if we need to like do some, if we need to interject and like fix anything, we have that window of opportunity to do it. So it's up to the team to kind of steward it through that launch and then set it up and freeze it for long-term success.
I think that makes sense by sort of limiting its scope. It probably allows you the opportunity more readily than something like a Bitcoin to step away and just leave the code immutable. So that sounds the right approach. One other thing I heard on a Spaces that you did recently that was intriguing was you're going to be introducing some form of staking with the token that miners can use. And again, that seems like a really interesting, novel approach to POW coins, because obviously staking has never really been a thing. So how did you arrive at that decision?
Yeah. That was the fourth nail in the coffin for the V1. Just keep adding nails. There was no like inherent, we came to the conclusion that miners who hold ore should receive some advantage in the system. They shouldn't be overpowered, but there should be some advantage. And it's all about like trying to find the right balance there. And so the mechanism that we landed on is basically a staking mechanism where if you leave your ore unclaimed, like just leave it in the contract, or you buy ore off the markets and you can stake it in the contract, depending on how much you have staked, you will basically earn a 2x multiplier, or up to a 2x multiplier on your mining rewards. And so that was meant to create just some like structural incentive to kind of like one ore, ore begets ore. If you have some ore in your mining, you'll receive more ore. And if you're not staking, you'll kind of, fall behind to those who are staking in some ways. And you'll still earn even if you're not staking. And the multiplier only applies if you're actively mining. So it's not really a like passive yield situation. Like you need to have real hash power and be actively submitting hashes for that multiplier to apply. But it is, meant to create a structural incentive to hold the token, and just give an advantage to those miners who value the ore and hold on to it, and signal that they're not just market selling.
Kind of like the last series of questions I wanted to touch on is, can you walk me through what the future looks like in terms of consumerizing mining and onboarding people into crypto this way. Um, and concretely, like, could someone mine ore on their mobile while doing other things with it? Would it have to be something they do when they're not using the phone? How are you thinking about this? Because I think, again, bringing up Ton, it's, and whether you want to call that real mining or not, it's not really mining. It's just, people are clicking stuff and maybe a background process is running and people acquire hot tokens or whatever. But that clearly worked. How are you thinking about, if you want to get 100 million users, a lot of them will be on mobile, a lot of them will be in emerging markets. What does that consumer experience look like for them?
Yeah, mobile is really key. It's absolutely key to reaching the masses. I mean, everything consumer happens on mobile, and so that's pretty fundamental. We won't have a mobile app ready like on the day of the V2 launch, but it is in the works, and so yeah, we're still working out the exact like rollout strategy there. Like, I think we'll probably start with Solana Saga, an Android app there. It's just easiest to get into the App Store, for us anyway. Easier than the Play Store or like the iOS App Store. But yeah, I mean, mobile is absolutely key to reaching consumers. And then the other kind of channel there is, I think it will. I don't want to reveal too many. We have some projects we're working on, but
Okay.
so I say, like, we do want to, like, the whole goal is like lower those barriers of entry as much as we can. So anything that just makes it easier for people to mine, like gives people more hash power, are things that we're kind of considering, and some we're actively moving on. So and we'll have a few surprise announcements over the next few months about that.
And real quickly, does the process of mining on a mobile device incapacitate it as far as processing? Like, what exactly is is happening at a technical
Yes.
level?
Well, yeah, it'll consume your battery for sure.
Okay.
Which is the opportunity cost. Going back to like the energy cost of producing tokens.
Yeah.
Like if someone's willing to give up their phone battery to acquire this token, it's a signal of like how much they value the token.
Yep.
You're going
But
to stop anyone from touching grass now. Just
Actually, no.
stay.
This is kind of brilliant because it'll get people off of TikTok and they'll just want to mine this instead. So this could actually solve a lot of societal problems all in one swoop.
yeah,
Banking, recommender
yeah.
systems.
I also have like a Saga that's sitting around collecting dust, and so it's like I
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Yeah.
It's doing literally nothing.
Yeah, if I could get that mining ore, like, it'd be useful. And yeah, it's basically doing computation on your phone. So there will be a toggle to sort of manage how many compute cores you're using. So if your phone has, say, 8 cores, you could say use 2 of them, and leave the other 6 for the rest of your phone and the rest of your applications. But if you want to max out and sort of make your phone real clunky and probably burn the battery, you could max it out and just grind on all cores. And so, yeah, I mean, we just kind of want to leave it to the user for them to make the decision as to how much of their computing device. Like, I think the user should be able to say whether anywhere from 0 to 100%. We just have to make those options available.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that in this market at the moment, I think we're in dire need of a new meta. People say that often the next meta tends to be like a new way for tokens to be distributed to people. Often the new metas
Yeah.
tend to be repetition of an old meta that never really quite got going. Or I'd say in this case, it's just been like most people in crypto have never mined. I've never mined because
Yeah.
you were just priced out. So it really feels like a really ripe, unique opportunity. This could really drive things forward because it is brand new. We've never had it on top of fast blockchains before. It does bring people in. And yeah, and also it's deep in, but like deep in on steroids, because you're not waiting for like, I don't know, AT&T to buy into the fact that this network is good enough for them to start using. And, it's a 5-10 year infrastructure project. The utility here initially is going to be people are buying it because they think the price will go higher. And that's the best utility there is in crypto. So I'm super excited. And I think it's got a real shot to sort of drive, both Solana and the entire crypto ecosystem forward next few months. So yeah, I just want to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think we see the same thing. And I've talked to a number of folks in the crypto space over the last few weeks. Yeah, we have secret projects we're working on, but suffice to say, like, I sort of take this vision of like, let 1,000 Satoshis bloom sort of thing, or like, we want to make these tools more accessible. I think it would be unfortunate if like OR is the only proof of work token. We saw a number of forks of OR, especially after the pause, and a lot of the discussion around those forks was happening in the OR Discord. It's like we kind of attracted this base of folks who like are really interested in mining, and obviously there's a lot of attention around OR, but it's proof of work can work for other tokens too. And I think it is a really unique mechanism of speculating and distributing tokens. And we have a lot of ideas on that front that, we're looking forward to sharing over the next few weeks.
Super cool. It's like a meta DAO and a sub DAO, as you have OR and then sub ORs.
That's in a way. Yeah.
That's a good note to close on, though. We're basically echoing what Dave said. Super excited for what's to come. Think this does have a shot at bringing on hundreds of millions of people through mining. Best of luck with the remainder of Coliseum Demo Day, pushing out V2 and all of the other secret projects that we're excited to learn about in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.